My name is Preethy Padmanabhan. I'm the founder of Pennett's Growth Strategies. We are a community in San Francisco Bay Area, and we bring together founders, investors, and executives. I also work in venture capital, and I'm part of Emerging Ventures with a seed pre-seed stage fund. I now pass the mic to the other panelists to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Denise, spelled like D, and I am the head of partnerships at AGIA. We are a applied research lab right now building experience agents. You can try one of our phone over there and our experience agent here today. I'm really excited about this conversation. Thanks to Future Pixel for inviting me.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I lead strategic foresight at Autodesk focused on climate change and emerging technologies as part of the Foresight Group Given Research. Autodesk is a design technology company helping people to create anything, and my role is really thinking about long-term future scenarios and horizons, and a lot on the sort of like ethical and societal implications of those actions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Azoff, and I'm the co-founder and general partner at a deep tech venture fund called SNOCAP. We focus on commercializing science and investing in the future we want, not necessarily the future we deserve. So very much looking forward to this conversation.
Wow, what an amazing lineup of speakers. And what an interesting topic we have today. Who decides what AI becomes? Is it the model builders, the ones who give us all the wonderful elements we use? Is it all the platforms and ecosystems that is building on top of these models? Is it all the governance, all the GDPR, CCPA, the Ethics Council, AI Governance Council? Is it them? In fact, when I was having this conversation at home with my husband, the other point that came up was, will AI decide what AI becomes? So we have some interesting things to share with you today. I'll get started with the first question. When we ask who decides what AI becomes, is the real power with the model builders, the enterprises, investors? Let's start with Natalia.
Well, I'm curious what everyone in here would answer. Thank you for yourself, Jessica. I think for any emerging innovation, it's an ecosystem effect, so probably all of them. But I think when you're in early formation, you kind of have this like blank state of state, meaning that there's a malleability to what's being made. And so in this moment, I'd say more of the power resides with people building financial models. There's also like latent power in the data itself, which you created. We all co-generate all the stuff that's being trained on, at least the language models. And I think, so a lot of the sort of opportunity to shape right now is sitting more in the sort of model side. But as things get more sophisticated, then the investors, as we're seeing come in, government has larger companies and have a role in sort of building guardrails or constraints or maybe aspirations in a more positive sense for what it can become. I really love Zoe and this group has some great banners outside that have these statements around one vision for where that technology can go. So can it help to spark and for imagination? But I think that's sort of like a collective project to figure out where we want it to go. And that power increasingly will be a public discourse, or maybe an intergovernmental body that's shaping things of that direction.
Well, that's a good segue to ask Denise for her feedback, especially being part of AGI. You have a different point of view. What do you think is going to be governmental?
Yeah, I agree with what Natalie and Natalia said, but and also believe that AI becomes is decided by many layers from the people who invest in the companies. Like as a former founder, I know that to build a product, it takes, especially in AI, it takes a good amount of money. So the entire ecosystem needs to come together to basically figure out who are those players who are going to shape the AI that we use on a daily basis. On the second side of things, as an applied research lab, one of our number one tenets at AGI Inc. is that we build and research and then put that into production in research previews for our users. And so it gives us a glimpse into, for example, how users even want AI to be utilized, to be applied within their systems. Like today, we have a first demo. You can take a look at where we have app control for an agent on your phone. When we first released it, we're like, oh, this is cooler than Siri, because Siri, you ask questions and it may respond, maybe. And then for AGI, it actually goes and then clicks around and it opens apps and does tasks for you. And we're like, that's so cool. And then our users were like, okay, this is cool. One day in, and they're like, can you operate in the background? And so our users then shape how we then continue building this technology and how it evolves. And so I think it's across the ecosystem. The people who give money to labs and companies to build these systems are pretty expensive, but also the users who use them and either impressed or hate it. And then it's like a constant evolution and a collaboration.
No, love that insight, and especially with what you brought up with the users, right? That's why we need more diverse users using AIs. That way we are actually getting the right data. Great point there. With Jonathan, I want to talk more about the startup ecosystem, considering that you're in venture. Given that we have large players in the ecosystem and then we have startups that are building from ground up. Tell us, what is the influence and the role of startup building on these models?
So, as I understand, the question is like, what is the influence that startups will have on the development of models? Yeah, I think it's a good framing. Startups are kind of caught in the middle, right? They're the users kind of influencing the design of the models, and then there's obviously the foundations making their own decisions, often also influenced by users. And then in the middle are these startups, and in some sense, they have an enterprise influence in that the APIs they use, the various function calls they make, those are going to influence how the large models support them. But I think there's also a interesting nuance in startups specifically. Startups are the interface for many people to the models, right? In the same way, crypto was kind of obscure, still in many ways is obscure, and a lot of folks have spent time to try to make it more relevant to everyday people. I think that is the role of startups, is to try to smooth out some of the uncomfortable nuances of AI, to try to make it a product people can trust and use. For my part, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of deep tech and commercializing science, we're interested in the types of AI that can actually make physical systems better. We believe in systems change, and one of the places, for instance, that AI has had a dramatic effect, if anyone here is in healthcare, biology, we've seen a tremendous explosion in our ability to predict various enzymes, proteins, and what that allows us to do is solve real problems, real physical problems in our systems at speeds we've never seen before. And to me, that's a very functionally different sort of way that people maybe normally talk about AI. We often talk about how AI shows up in our lives in various digital ways, but I don't think many people realize how many ways it's going to show up in our physical world, right? Whether it's faster creation of vaccines or potentially even treatments for various types of cancers. And in a world I'm particularly passionate about, how can we use AI to predict biological solutions for climate change and for rock weathering and water acidification and all sorts of things like that. I think there's some really exciting things coming down the pipe. In that sense, I think startups are influencing it.
Very inspiring. I think you're absolutely right? Even I think I've heard of startups that are actually able to predict even wildfires and feeding lots of lives, right? So great thoughts out there. Let's take a turn into ethics and responsible AI, right? That's another conversation we would love to have. I start with Natalia here. Tell us about how do organizations incorporate ethical foresight into AI without slowing innovation?
I don't know if I have a golden answer to that. If anyone does, I'd love to hear it. The core of this role, I spent 6 years at a design and innovation consultancy called IDEO, and did a lot of this sort of impact and climate change work. And it felt like the exercise was how to create systems outside of technology, sometimes involving technology, but at that point it wasn't so much artificial intelligence, but how to create systems that would guide consumer behavior and markets for the kinds of outcomes that would help us have a thriving planet and healthy lives and autonomy and safety and freedom and all the things that we want ideally. And it's like all of those questions and all of that complexity is now going to move through this membrane that is AI. So as we dialogue with a chat interface to brainstorm ideas for a solution or to ask, how do we, I'm in a city government and I have acres of land I need to do something with. Should I use it for reforestation and sequester carbon? Should I go biodiversity project? Should I maximize the potential economic output of this area? All these big systems questions are starting to move through AI interfaces. So the power that those interfaces now hold becomes this huge ethical question because the values that they have been trained with are the values that are going to be in that membrane that your intent and your desire moves through. So I think some of the biggest opportunities then are to shape those values. So right now, most major labs that at least have published their intention around values are aiming for helpfulness, safety, non-harm. Great, you love that, we need that. And there's a lot of detail that you can get into around what that means in that training. But that's going to a constitution that governs a major model. Basically, like if you're parenting a child, like this is what our family believes. This is what is good. This is what is bad. And then you have all this all this reinforcement learning. That's sort of like here are examples. But when you steal, that's bad. When you hurt someone, that's bad. So the same kind of ethical frameworks are being given to train. So the big opportunity is like to nail those and get those as right as possible, and to figure out how to represent as much like pluralistic morality as you can, because each one of you holds a different value system than the person next to you. We all have different worldviews and religions and beliefs about human rights. And so I think the big projects ahead of us, like we know kind of how to train. We know sort of where we want it to go. I guess it's an AI future that doesn't remove humans or their intent from the planet, but representing that plurality and getting all these viewpoints expressed is a huge project. And so for a company, it might look like bringing together a consortium to define what good environmental stewardship values, biosphere preservation. What does that look like as a framework, and then how do we train? For nations, I think we'll start to see more of this. Actually, the Hub of Rome just put out a letter asking for this kind of work, but for the United Nations to take on the work of organizing different organizations, private sector, public sector, NGOs to come to some kind of agreement, because we don't currently have one true vision for what good looks like here. And it's really left to a couple thousand individuals who mostly live in the Bay Area, who are wonderful people, but and many of them are my friends, but this technology is going to be globally representative and globally governing, and so having that voice and ethics in there is important.
I really love that. Actually, I think the value-based AI certainly is a great place that get us to where we want to be. So you love that insights. In fact, one of the things I do also is meditate every day. And we talk about this absolute intelligence, right? Which is actually also something beyond artificial intelligence that is governing. So how do we then tap into our own creativity and make sure that AI is working for us? Great thoughts there. I would love to turn to Denise. Let's talk about as AI becomes embedded in sectors like infrastructure design and climate systems, who's responsible for anticipating any second order effects, unintended consequences? Does your company think about that, and how does it frame that?
When we started kind of deploying our agents, especially as it has to do with controlling what is on your either web or computer or phone interface, one of the first things that we thought about as a company was reliability. It was going to be at the core of our decision making about whether or not readiness was there. While other labs were going for speed, a person can't wait for the agent to take action on something. We need to move faster first and then focus on reliability. The agents that we were building were the most reliable in the partnership conversations. That's one of the tenets that we really focused on, because if you're going to deploy an agent, like for example, we just came from Mobile World Congress in Barcelona last week, where we showcased a proof of concept on Moto phones with Lenovo within their Kira AI, which is their ambient intelligence. And within that, they asked Kira to take actions that were powered by AGI. And it's really important when they're showing their partners, their users, that an agent is going to take action on their behalf, that it actually completes the action. It thinks about them being in the loop. And so for us, reliability was really a core value in the way that we build the systems that we create. And so as we think about just infrastructure design, it's also bringing in partners like the OEMs, the network providers, and I'll cover some of this in a later question in the conversation to make sure that the value, usually when it has to do with users, of reliability is at the core of what we're building.
So wonderful. Jonathan, I turn to you now. Again, coming back to the large companies and startups, right? All these large companies, there's concentrated AI capabilities being built by these providers. How can you make sure the ecosystem remains open for startups, developers, and the new entrants?
Sure. So actually, it's a very quick answer to that question. It's entirely open source. I mean, that is the short answer. Like, in some sense, Facebook and Meta and their Llama platform effectively prevents a complete monopoly on privately owned models. And thankfully, it's been hard for those models to escape and have an outright winner. So I do think open source will continue to catch up and play a critical role in keeping things open. I do want to say, though, one thing about the previous question, which I think is really important. At least I would feel remiss if I didn't say it. And that is, and maybe just so I don't mansplain this, how many people by a show of hands know what a world model is? Okay, so I will explain it briefly. A world model is effectively a way of comprehending the world. Like, for instance, I could explain the rules of chess to a 6-year-old, and then a 6-year-old can play chess in any variation because that human being understood the rules of chess. LLMs do not have world models. They don't actually understand anything. They're statistical machines. That's why things like human in a loop are really helpful, because when the statistics break down, you need someone to course correct. And I think that's really important to remember, because if we actually want to have an honest conversation about ethics in AI or anything like that, we also have to ask ourselves, like, how can you control a system that inherently we do not understand, or that does not understand us? And so I think some of the most interesting questions around AI ethics are actually about breaking apart the machine that nobody really understands and putting stuff into it, like world models and like observability, so that you can actually understand how it's making decisions. And only then can you truly have any chance of controlling how it makes decisions, as, controlling ethical outcomes. So I would feel weird commenting on the ethics of AI without also just being very clear that we ourselves do not understand how it works necessarily by design. And so to control it is very hard without understanding it. That I just want to make sure
That makes perfect sense. And thanks for jumping in. Would anybody else want to add any thoughts on any of the prior questions on startups or even the ecosystem? I want to make sure we captured that before I jump to the remaining topics. All right. And by the way, we do have time for audience questions, so please do keep that in mind. And we'll go to one more round and we'll come to the audience. Let's turn to Denise again on partnership, because I know you run partnerships for AGI. So tell us about the role partnership will play and on how AGI capabilities gets distributed.
When we first released the AGI agent, without going into specific numbers or some proprietary information, it's actually a very expensive system to run, is one thing that I'll touch on. Second thing that I'll touch on is when you are thinking about an agent operating on a phone. I just spent time in Europe. I have T-Mobile. I don't know if anyone has T-Mobile or one of those. And in Europe, I didn't upgrade the plan because I was like, I won't need it. And so the Wi-Fi was super slow. And for these agents to work, they have to operate obviously on a network. That makes sense. And so when you're thinking about this technology, not only leaving Silicon Valley, going to rural areas in the US or even to where I was born in Rwanda or East Africa. I think a lot about what does it mean for everyone to have access to these really cool technologies. And it's about making sure that you're bringing down costs. Obviously, compute has been expensive. It's going to get less expensive over time. But it just also means that there are certain parts of the world that may not get access to this amazing technology really soon. And then the second one is bringing in also bandwidth players. So when I went to actually another conference in Doha, where a lot of their conversations was access to this technology in Africa and other regions that don't have the same infrastructure that, say, the Bay Area where a lot of this technology is being built. And a lot of those infrastructure players were thinking a lot around how does this operate on lower bandwidth? So if it's not 5G and above and 6G is coming in 2030 or something like that, how do you make sure that if you are deploying these agents to places where bandwidth is really low, that these agents are working? I'm basically posing a lot of questions that are still questions that I think my team thinks about when we think about putting these agents on phones everywhere. It's really bringing ecosystem partners, including bandwidth players, the OEM that's going to host the agent, and many other people within that to make sure that this technology is not just accessible to the few who can afford it, but it's also accessible and available to others, where I think it would be even more impactful in other regions. So I'm really excited about what we're doing with partnerships to make sure that as we deploy, we're also understanding the problem, not just in Silicon Valley or the US, but also beyond that.
Yeah. No, it's great you gave a global perspective, right? Because we cannot all be just focused on one small area in the US, but thinking about Africa and rest of the world, and how does it get easy to get access and reduce the cost? Great perspectives on that. Let's now go into the part of capital, and I turn to Natalia here. And if capital, compute, and data, we talked about all these here in the panel, are the three key resources shaping AI. Which of them will ultimately determine who has the most control?
Actually, it's another trick question of the combination. Also energy, I would say.
Yeah.
Like the race that's basically happening is between two countries because they have the most physical hardware to do a compute and then the energy to supply it and run everything. And obviously, where we're seeing now the US is in a race to build more grid capacity. Yeah, and they all seem sort of like races, right? I mean, like the capital race right now is sort of which organizations can grow the most funding at developing, bringing in great talent, and then running a compute that's very expensive and testing. I really think it's a combination there. And I think that there are some less tangible assets that also really make a difference here. So, like one theory is that we can't really get to, your company is called AGI, but we can't get to artificial general intelligence or more advanced level of AI without having some kind of breakthrough in model architecture itself. So right now we have the statistics-based LLM language models. It may be that we need something completely different, and that would be in your list something that would sort of super junk all of that if someone can get there first. They're like bets around world modeling, and actually Autodesk just made an investment in a group called World Labs that's led by Preethy out of Stanford. But maybe even something beyond those, but some kind of new architecture would be huge on that. So I think there are like the known variables that maybe you can accelerate, and then there's some sort of wild cards that we really don't know. And those known variables have really real limits in terms of how much, like if you took the most extreme case in the world, there are only so many critical minerals. There is only so much solar energy. There's a lot we can do, but eventually you start to hit what are called walls, this sort of like a compute wall, our ability to compute, or an energy wall, our ability to produce that. So yeah, it's in the combination, but also sort of the breakthroughs that help us get around those hard limits that we face, including the architecture itself.
Great. I love it. I love how you expanded it to beyond just those three that we're talking about. Let's talk about VC incentives and influence. Would love, Jonathan, your perspective. How do VC incentives influence the types of AI companies being built? You talked about all the companies, your funding. Do you think you're funding what is most transforming, or is it more about monetization? I know I come to the VC world to want to get your perspective.
Do I think we are funding what is most transformative or what?
Monetizable, because VCs, we are focused more on like GTM and what would make immediate money. Where do you see, or is it a mix of both, right? In by your perspective.
Sure. Well, I am very proud to say that I am a very bad VC because, like, I'm not necessarily focused on the same incentives as what mainstream VC is focused on. So, in that sense, you know, at least insofar as I have any influence over how the outcomes of AI demand are developed, I would say that transformation is certainly important to me. But I also think there's going to be a lot of well-meaning VCs who are investing in transformation vis-a-vis AI. And I think the question we should all ask when that happens is, what exactly are we transforming? I think many of us could make an argument that social media transformed our lives, but what is the transformation and how do we feel about it? And what are the repercussions of that transformation? So I think it's fine to say they're going to transform things, but that kind of is maybe one level short of unpacking, I think, the critical question, which is what happens afterwards. Of course, venture will always be alpha seeking. And I think by that measure, these short-term wins will also get a lot of investment. I think the people I admire the most in VC who are investing in AI are thinking systemically. So they're thinking about net changes versus an individual change or a individual impact. And when they think in that way, they can, in some sense, have their cake and eat it too. They can invest in something meaningful, something that doesn't have side effects they weren't anticipating, while at the same time return great alpha for their LPs and investors.
Yeah, I love that. Any audience questions? I guess we answered all your questions.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Okay, I want to do a show of hands game, future tensions. Raise your hand if you think, so the two options are going to be, is AI more going to be like incremental kind of efficiency gains, productivity, that camp, or transformational society change to human like perception of what we are. So raise your hand if it's more efficiency and sort of small term sort of functional gains. Okay, couple hands. The latter, transformational. Okay, and then we had two people opted out, but we had more in the second bucket. And this is a question that I run with our executive team, and back when I was at IDEO, was executive teams of other major technology companies. And the number of hands that have flipped from one side to the other over time has really changed. So, like 5 years ago, it was a lot more, I was saying like functional gains, we're doing a little better at writing, a little better image generation, not buying the hype, and we're definitely still in a hype cycle, but it's interesting to see kind of that evolution over time and where you are. And it would be interesting for yourself to time capsule where you are in this moment and come back in 5 years or 10 years. You like write yourself a Google Calendar reminder, but see where you are in that arc at the time. And I think the reason I'm asking the question, because it's one that I know that leaders of major companies are asking themselves, but also I think colors a bit of the questions that we're asking in terms of like how big should we be thinking about the risk for the capital and the degree of transformation that we expect out of those questions.
Love it. Great perspective there. Any other questions while you had time? Yes, go ahead.
You were mentioning that maybe we don't know enough about how it works, although humans are the ones who developed AI, right? Statistic kind of lens is just one layer of it. And those who decided that were really computational mathematicians and, big brains, these big companies. Moving forward, talking about world models and other ways of building AI, who are the big players that you think could kind of combat or start changing the tides of how we view AI and our capacity to control or input, a desired outcome?
Well, first of all,
please repeat the question.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's a very good question. So basically, and tell me if I'm not summarizing this right, but if AI and LLMs, which are basically what we mean when we say AI, are stuck in this sort of statistical trap, what are the alternatives? What are the other things we should look for that maybe could get us out of there? And I think Natalia called out a few things. the one that's caught my attention is a type of AI called neurosymbolic AI, which is like LLMs. It's a statistical machine, but it uses symbols to represent its thought process. So you can look at it. It's kind of as though you had an MRI on your brain. And as someone tells you a joke, you notice one part of your brain lights up, right? And you're like, okay, maybe that's the part of the brain that understands humor. And then maybe you say something sad and another part of your brain lights up. Well, it's similar to that. And so over time, you can actually start to understand how the system reacts and interprets things, and then you can put controls in. So, for instance, maybe anger creeps up. I don't know how many of you have watched the very weird social experiment of OpenClaw and the whole social network of AI bots. But there's pretty sad things going on there where, like, you know, I can't tell if it's humans just masquerading as bots or whatever. But should negative things come up, right, in a neurosymbolic AI, you can actually see that happening. And so rather than trying to cover your bases, put a human in the loop, or like introduce every keyword you know that represents a bad thing to try to stop it, you can actually just see it happen. And then you can stop it in a sort of more systemic way. So I think that's one of the fields of AI research that holds a lot of promise. I would also caution anyone who believes or hears this concept that we're on like a Moore's law of AI, where AI is just getting better and faster. It's not entirely true. Like, we have hit a mathematically provable limit. This is research done in Germany that we cannot make LLMs any better. We can only keep adding features to them, but we can't actually make them perform with less hallucinations, for instance. So another thing I would say is, as you're trying to figure out, you know, what AI stuff should I be paying attention to, know that a lot of this stuff is back to the fundamental research base. And you cannot throw money at researchers and make them research faster, right? Like, research takes time. And so those are just the things I would caution you to think. It's like, it's not, you can't force innovation. Innovation happens on its own time. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah. Okay.
Great question and great answer. Any other questions?
So, it's okay. Never mind. Yeah. So the question I have is, when we ask who decides what AI becomes, right? So who decides what AI becomes for our younger generation, right? Because they have been like bombarded with all these ChatGPT tools, and some of them feel like they have superpowers now, right? But how do we actually help them use this responsibly? Because I have an academy that actually helps kids to understand and become informed AI consumers, and then slowly move them into becoming AI builders, where they actually learn how to use those models to solve scientific problems. But then how do you, when kids start off, how do you actually help them get into this in a responsible way?
I'll repeat the question, and then any of the panelists are welcome to answer. So basically, the question is, how can young people, children, basically be, treated with AI and not have it be a negative influence on their lives, but then also empower them to create and use it? Yeah, okay. I mean, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, so this is front and center for me. I think there's a concept of digital resiliency, which is the idea that when I grew up, I knew nothing about finance at all. Until I graduated college, it was my accountant roommate who taught me how finance works, right? There's so many things we don't educate kids on. I think we need to accept that digital resiliency education is an important part of any child's education at this point. Everyone is growing up with digital products. They need to understand how they make money. If you're not paying for it, you're probably the product, right? And what does that mean for you? How can you use it as a tool versus something that takes away from you? I don't know if either of you have an answer.
I have a little bit of an answer. So this past winter, my cousin visited my family from Rwanda. And it was interesting. She spent an entire day in her room. I had worked that day, so I wasn't paying that much attention. And then at dinner, when I asked her, like, what did you do today? She's like, he's 13. She was like, well, I was just asking ChatGPT some questions. My heart started racing, and I was like, okay, like how do we enter this conversation? And so some things that I did was basically first ask her what she was asking ChatGPT. She was like, I'm having trouble at school and I wanted ChatGPT to give me these answers. I was like, did you talk to your mom about it? Or do you even know how ChatGPT works and how it answers questions? And so we started a conversation around like education around the tool that she was using first. And then from the education around the tool that she was using, opened a two-way conversation on how to not only rely on these things that actually sometimes work, like I've used ChatGPT as my personal therapist, but also have her understand like what prompting looks like, what questions you get, answers you get when you prompt. So I don't have children. I don't spend much time around children. But that was an experience that was a little bit scary, but also informational in the way that we did it. And then the second thing I was going to say is during the pandemic, I got excited and obsessed with the Social Network. No, not Social Network. It was I'm forgetting the name of the movie on Netflix.
Social Dilemma.
The what?
Social Dilemma.
Yes, Social Dilemma. The Social Dilemma. And I almost feel like there's some lessons we can pull out of the Social Dilemma and the impacts of social media and some of these schools on children and just society in general. But those are my immediate comments. I think it's everyone's responsibility, both the tools themselves, but also just making sure that as family, friends, people, we're really aware of how children and others are using this technology.
Thank you. One thing is I really appreciate what you're doing for the community by building all these classes for children. I think that one deserves an applause. Thank you for that. And I'll also believe as a parent myself, right, to actually, not understand that the children are pretty resilient and they figured it out, right? To know that confidence and have that while also coaching them also helps, right? To give them the benefit of doubt and that confidence that, we believe in them. Check out any other final with?
It occurred to me as everyone is speaking that the question that I'm hearing you ask and the kinds of responses that I'm hearing are no different for children than they are for adults right now. So I don't know if there's a big, other than like the development of the brain of the person asking. I'm working right now with the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco to think about how AI might be better used or used at all by their scientists, and they have a whole gamut of capability already and willingness to work with technology. And I find that I keep running into these archetypes. And so maybe the question, I don't have children, I don't want to say children, I'm unqualified to comment on your question, but maybe a question that could be posed to the asker, to the child, is like, where would you like to sit in these four archetypes as this technology emerges? Abstain, that's like the Luddite perspective, like just don't want to say it. Passive participation, so you're sort of, the system is happening to you around you, but you're not taking an active part and role in it. ChatGPT shows up on your support place. More active participation, you're learning, you're trying kind of in the direction that he was speaking to, you're learning, you're trying to become literate and have agency in these tools. And then systems shaping, where you're sort of working to architect your models themselves, where, that kid could grow up to become the person who you embody governing this stuff. So I think that having some thoughtful reflection and parental guidance, either they want to sit in that space, or you want to stay exercise. And it is very, very similar to what I'm doing with the scientists in these other domains.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we go to the final round of questions here. Actually, I have a fun question for all of you. I think easy one. What is your favorite AI tool? Maybe one or two that you use on a regular basis.
So one of the challenges, I don't know how many folks here understand like the actual formation of venture funds. Most of the time when we hear about venture, we hear about like these mega, super huge venture funds, but the really small ones have to see as many deals and don't really have as much time. And when you're in my field, you also have to basically learn 10 years of scientific literature in 3 months in order to decide if this is a company you're excited to invest in. And while I do have my gripes with LLMs and sort of the things they can and cannot do, one thing they are undeniably good at is summarizing things. And I have to say, I have researched everything from the future of fusion through to battery recycling, and even things like how we print enzymes in the lab. And I know enough at this point to be dangerous, maybe not useful. But I could not have done that if not for these tools. And the fact that these tools existed right as I was starting this fund and learning about all this amazing science, I think it makes it a very unique point in time to be investing in science, because never before could you compress so much scientific literature into such a digestible format. So I'd say, as far as the tools I use, I mean, it's the same tools everyone else uses. I'm a programmer, so I get to kind of use them in a more direct way, but it is undeniable that large language models have certainly informed my ability to learn.
Okay, very cheesy. My own imagination, yours, because it allows me to envision a possible future state of artificial intelligence technologies that allows me to then reason today about how I want to interact with the ones that exist. So an example is like we were talking about, like, okay, black box, sometimes we don't know how it operates, and we also have this thing of one of these big barriers is like sort of how you need to go back to research fundamentals. There's this like scenario that people look at where AI becomes able to use sort of like self-improvement, refers to self-improvement for editing its own code. There's a little bit of this happening now, but if that, based on this basic theories research, becomes more possible, then you could have like a takeoff scenario where AI is getting better and better, it's building itself and getting smarter. And there's all kinds of big moral problems associated with that. But if you take sort of as an assumption that AI would improve in the coming decades significantly, then you can start to do mental thought experiments that are like, what is the application of a very sophisticated AI technology? Some of the questions that I'm sitting with, and the ones that I think about similar to, I think, are around climate change, sort of like R&D, material science, huge world mapping. Could we understand the entire biosphere, all of its interactions, and possible unintended consequences of any action? Like that kind of intelligence, if it existed, would be an incredible tool. So the way this imagination plays in is like, great, let me sit today and think about the puzzles that I'm working on, like what could be solved in the future if this really produces. And then that helps me, I guess, as a tool in my day-to-day work, because I'm ESA and asking different questions of my researchers and of the work that I'm doing. So that would be, it wasn't really what tools should I suggest, but that has been most helpful for me beyond anything that I'm sitting down at a desktop with today.
I have a black answer. Well, the first one that came to mind was obviously what we're into building at AGI, but that will be cheating. So I was a founder for 8 years prior to joining AGI as a head of partnerships. And one of the reasons that I actually joined and came to the to San Francisco was because the first week of being in the Bay Area, I met a company founder who built my company in 2 months with more revenue than I did in 8 years. And so just that was like my first example of the power of AI. And I was just so excited and a little scared by the technology. But it's been really awesome to be me times 3 other AIs in my day-to-day work. Where in the past I'd go to a designer. Obviously, designer is super important in the work that we're doing, but at least I can not give gibberish. I can do like, here's an interface of what I'm thinking before, and do some of the pre-work before I ask them to imagine what's in my head. So there's just so many amazing things that can be done with AI today, and that supercharged my ability to help our team move really quickly and prototype really fast with our partners and customers. And I guess I use Quad a lot, to be honest, not because they're an investor of AGI, but also because I just think that it's been a better fit for some of the work I do on a day-to-day basis.
And we are allowed to be a platform. Essentially, check out AGI and all the companies that they represent, right? So certainly valuable insight they're giving us here. I had one more tool that I use regularly. I use GenSpark. They've been around for the last couple of years, and what it helps me do is they actually go and pull the different models, right? If I give them assignments for, like, say, image creation or a video creation, they go and work with the best tools out there, Deep, Nano, Banana, or others, and then be able to generate that. So it's like, for me, one single place to get the value of all the different LLMs. So I love that about them. And for the final question, I'd like to ask the panelists here, looking ahead the next 10 years of AI, what are some opportunities or challenges that you see in Xavier's going from here today? Would you like to start?
I predict 10 years. It's interesting how even today we can't predict the next 6 months, the next week sometimes. But I think the biggest opportunities and challenges go back to any time that I'm building something, or even when I do my work in the Bay Area, I'm always thinking about the impacts of the work and the things we're building on the rest of the world. And so I think the opportunity and challenge is how to distill and also make the technologies and the awesome things that are being built so that they're accessible to not just the haves, but it's also available to everyone. And that's one side of things. And then the second thing is outside of the hubs that we look to, there are really great things happening across the world. Recently, my team just brought on an awesome 3-person team from India that has just thought about solving a problem that we were really excited about in with way less resources. And so even just looking at talent outside of where we expect talent to come from, and look at talent in hubs and areas where we may not first get to do, will also help build a picture that's not accessible to just some people, but it's also accessible to everyone. So that's what I'm excited about between now and the next 10 years plus.
I love that. I feel like the answer to this question is more questions. So in our Foresight work, we will look at scenarios, and part of how we get to those scenarios is by asking questions and kind of doing like a matrix or plotting along a timeline. So some of these questions are, will the models be more open or closed? Right now, they're mostly closed, like Lami's a little bit open, but that ability for a developer to come in and tinker and play with it has huge implications. How fast the models develop, where they proliferate, if they stay safe, or if bad actors start to make them or work with them. Then you have questions like, how much global cooperation will there be? Right now, we're kind of in this, like, everyone's sort of nearshoring, they're trying to protect their domestic interests, so you're seeing less cooperation. If we start to move into a scenario where you have countries coming together, like they did around the nuclear problem or the pandemic problem, and say, problem and opportunity, AI is a large technology that's starting to impact society, then you might see more cooperation that kind of shapes the answer to that 10-year answer. You have other tensions as well, like public sentiment. Right now, people are talking about it a lot where I live in the Bay Area. They're talking about it in news like this. There isn't a huge national dialogue around AI. There's a documentary coming out on the 27th that is like a bunch of leading voices in AI, whistleblowing, talking about opportunities, leaders of all the major labs, and also lawyers, basically. And I think that could be a sort of like intermediate truth moment. So climate change, the way that happened, it could be an activation of public moral imagination starting in late March. We'll see. And so I think these sort of questions start to shape these different scenarios where you have a lot of cooperation and you have a lot of openness. You get to one place. Where we are now is way like not too much global cooperation, not a lot of openness, and then it's really the case of the development itself. So those are questions that we're asking to answer the 10-year scenario. It feels like the biggest opportunities are around the black box point, so understanding what is happening and maintaining some human agency and control. And then I think asking the question, which again is sort of posed by this space that we're in around, like, what is the point of this technology? At the end of the day, what is the project of our civilization that we want to get to? Is it more efficiency for humanity, or is it something more beautiful and abstract and sort of about a common project of either thriving or stewardship or expansion? And there are lots of schools of thought around this, but I think that people often say AI is philosophy on a deadline, and we have a question to ask ourselves since we're developing technology that touches us all about what we all want.
Philosophy in the deadline. It's good. I might steal that. Okay. Well, how do I not cop out of this answer? Especially since my job is kind of to predict the future to some degree. I think there is a question that we should ask ourselves about the technology that came before us. and ask ourselves how we interface and made decisions around that technology, and then what happened afterwards. I took a class in college that was called Discerning Your Vocation, and it was just meant to reduce the existential dread that graduating students had. And the major learning from the class was, if you look back at your life and you look at all the decisions you made and you ask yourself why you made those decisions, the chances that you'll make decisions in the same way going forward and the outcomes will be similar. I think that was a really powerful learning for me, because it informed so much of how I think about the world and so much of how I show up in the world. And so when we think about what the next 10 years holds for AI, it's largely a function of how we make decisions and how to use it, and critically what we decide to pay for. Because there's one truth that is undeniable about AI, is that it is way cheaper now than it should be. And the only reason it's cheap is because we are throwing unbelievable amounts of money at it. Like, just GDP mind-blowing levels of money at it. And you may recall Ubers and Lyfts used to be cheap too. They're not so cheap anymore. They're not cheap because they're a duopoly now. And that same thing will happen to AI. So ask yourself, if you could bring yourself back to the 2010s or 2005, when Uber and Lyft still had mustaches on their cars and they were throwing promos everywhere to try to get people to ride their vehicles, and you could make different decisions about the products you bought at that moment, whether it was go for the, third tier carpool service, see if you could get more competition in the market. Maybe you could have had an influence in one small part in what we have today. The same is true for AI. I think we are actively every day showing up and making decisions in what we pay for and how AI shows up in our lives. And your small decisions and what you choose to pay for and how you choose to bring it into your life will have ramifications, especially if many of you choose to do it. So I can't exactly predict what it is, but I can definitely say it isn't the first time we've had opportunities to make decisions about our technologies, whether it's rideshare or social media or anything else. So I would say take that back and maybe spend some time thinking about it. Maybe you'll make a decision that surprises you.
The first time we all met that today before this panel, but what we brought together here, it's mind-blowing for me. I just love this, like values, global impact, responsibility, all of these themes got discussed here today. And I hope all of you took at least one or two things that you can take back and implement and make something good out of this. Thank you all for being here, and let's give a big round of applause to the panelists here today.